The journey of mass illumination begins not with the spark of a flame, but with the visceral weight of death and the pungent atmosphere of the melting house, where the raw materials of production are harvested from the slaughter. In the bustling industrial centers of the 18th century, the master chandler awaits the daily delivery of rough suet, the hard, structural fat found around the loins and kidneys of sheep and oxen, which constitutes the primary ingredient for the common tallow candle. Piles of this off-white fibrous mass are dumped onto heavy wooden tables, carrying the distinct, cloying scent of the abattoir that permeates the workshop and clings to the heavy woolen aprons of every apprentice and master. The first task is strictly physical and demands a ruthless eye for separation, as the workmen wield sharp knives to chop the suet into small, manageable pieces. A crucial step to ensure the fat renders down evenly without burning the membranous tissue that holds it together. It is a greasy, slick labor that coats the hands in a film of animal lipid, requiring a constitution that can withstand the nausea induced by the overwhelming aroma of raw fat warming in the ambient heat of the room, a smell that defines the trade as much as the light it eventually produces. Once the suet is reduced to minced fragments, it is shoveled into great copper cauldrons set over open masonry furnaces, where the alchemy of heat transforms solid waste into liquid utility. The fire must be regulated with the precision of a jeweler, for if the flames rise too high, the fat will darken and scorch, resulting in brown, foul-smelling candles that sputter and smoke. But if the heat is too low, the rendering remains incomplete. As the yellow liquid begins to bubble and rise, the chandler stands vigilant with a long-handled iron skimmer, constantly removing the rising impurities and the fibrous connective tissues known as greaves or cracklings. These membranous leftovers do not go to waste, but are pressed in a heavy iron screw press to squeeze out every last drop of precious tallow, before being sold off as food for dogs or bait for fishermen, creating a secondary economy within the grime of the workshop. The sound of the bubbling fat and the crackle of the furnace creates a rhythmic backdrop to the sweltering heat, where sweat mingles with the greasy vapors, marking the physical toll of purifying the fuel that will eventually drive back the darkness of winter nights. The final stage of preparation involves a delicate process of clarification to ensure the tallow is clean enough to burn with a semblance of stability and brightness. The molten fat is passed through a coarse sieve into a secondary vat containing a measure of boiling water, which serves to wash the tallow and encourage any remaining dirt, blood, or heavy particles to precipitate to the bottom of the vessel. After a period of vigorous agitation, the mixture is left to settle for hours, allowing the purified tallow to float to the surface in a pristine, creamy layer while the water and dregs sink, a separation that mimics the division between the refined product and the waste of the slaughterhouse. This clarified liquid is then ladled into cooling blocks, or left in the cisterns to solidify into a hard, white substance, ready to be melted down again when the dipping or molding begins. The quality of this resulting block is the primary determinant of the chandler's reputation. A white, hard tallow suggests a higher proportion of sheep fat and careful rendering, while a soft, yellowish block betrays a reliance on pig fat or careless, scorching heat during the initial melt. While the tallow provides the fuel, the soul of the candle resides in the wick, a component that requires a completely different set of textile skills and material knowledge to prepare for mass production. In this era, before the invention of the self-consuming plaited wick, the standard core is made from loosely spun cotton or sometimes linen, imported in bales and processed by teams of women and children who work in the cleaner sections of the manufactory. The cotton rovings must be twisted with just enough tension to hold their shape during the dipping process, but remain loose enough to act as a capillary straw, drawing the molten fat up into the flame. If the twist is too tight, the flame will starve and gutter. If too loose, the wick will burn too quickly and cause the candle to stream, wasting the precious fat in a mess of drippings. The workers cut these lengths of cotton to precise measurements, usually roughly twice the length of the intended candle, as they are often doubled over the dipping rods, forming a loop that will eventually be cut or burned through. The preparation of these wicks often involves a chemical treatment known as mordanting, although many common tallow chandlers skip this step for the cheapest wares, reserving it for higher quality production. The cotton lengths are soaked in solutions of mineral salts, vinegar, or sometimes boric acid, a process designed to retard the burning of the wick so that it does not consume itself faster than the tallow melts. After soaking, the wicks must be dried thoroughly in a kiln or a warm drying room, as even the slightest hint of moisture trapped within the fibers will cause the candle to sputter violently and potentially extinguish itself when lit. This invisible chemistry is a closely guarded secret among master chandlers, with each workshop boasting its own recipe for the perfect wick solution. The dried wicks are then meticulously sorted and straightened, ensuring there are no knots or frays that could cause an uneven burn, representing the intersection of textile precision and chemical engineering within the candle-making trade. The final step in this phase is the dressing of the broaches, which are smooth wooden rods or sticks about 3 feet in length, designed to hold multiple wicks for simultaneous dipping. The apprentices take the cut wicks and loop them over the broaches at regular intervals, spacing them with the width of a finger to ensure the growing candles do not touch each other as they gain girth. A slight twist is often applied to the loop to keep the two tails of the wick together, effectively creating a dual core that will be separated later, or simply to ensure the single wick hangs dead straight. Hundreds of these broaches are prepared daily, lining the racks like the bare skeletons of the candles they are destined to become. The visual uniformity of the hanging white strings against the dark wood of the broaches is the first sign of order emerging from the chaos of raw materials, setting the stage for the rhythmic, repetitive labor of the dipping room that will follow. The heart of the tallow candle manufactory is the dipping room, a space dominated by a large rectangular cistern made of lead-lined wood or copper, filled with the clarified tallow kept in a permanent state of liquidity by a small charcoal fire beneath it. The temperature of this bath is critical and must be maintained just above the melting point. If the tallow is too hot, it will melt the layers already deposited on the wick, undoing the work of previous dips. But if it is too cool, the fat will clot and form unsightly lumps or ribs on the candle's surface. The dipper, a man of immense stamina and rhythmic precision, stands before the cistern with a frame that holds several broaches, suspending dozens of wicks at once. He lowers the frame slowly into the liquid fat, allowing the wicks to submerge completely, and then withdraws them with a steady, fluid motion to ensure a smooth, even coating. This first dip, known as the tagging, is the most difficult, as the dry cotton must be thoroughly saturated to form the foundation for all subsequent layers. Once the first coat is applied, the broaches are moved to a cooling rack, often a rotating carousel or a long wooden frame exposed to the coolest air in the shop, for the tallow must harden before it can accept another layer. This necessity creates a cyclical workflow where the dipper moves from one batch to the next in a continuous loop, returning to the first batch only when it is sufficiently firm to touch. The atmosphere in the dipping room is one of silent, focused intensity, broken only by the soft splash of the rods entering the fat and the creaking of the wooden racks. With each successive dip, the candle grows in diameter by a fraction of an inch, requiring the dipper to adjust the spacing on the broaches to prevent the thickening candles from fusing together. It is a game of patience and accumulation, typically requiring between 8 to 12 dips to produce a standard pound candle. with the dipper constantly judging the weight and thickness by eye and hand, a skill honed over decades of repetitive motion. As the candles approach their final size, the dipper must exercise even greater care to ensure the shape remains tapered and cylindrical, compensating for the natural tendency of the gravity-fed liquid to accumulate more heavily at the bottom. The final dip is often performed with slightly hotter tallow to smooth out any surface irregularities and give the candle a polished, finished appearance. The bottom of the candles, where the dripping tallow forms a hardened nipple or bell shape, must be managed. Often, while the wax is still warm and pliable, the racks are lowered onto a wet board or a warm metal plate to flatten the bases, ensuring the candles will stand upright in a holder. The physical exertion of lifting the heavy frames, now laden with pounds of solid fat, repeats hundreds of times a day, resulting in a specific muscular development in the shoulders and back of the dipper, whose body becomes as much a tool of the trade as the cistern itself. Just as a candle relies on a steady wick to burn, our forge relies on your support to keep the past illuminated. Click subscribe now to fuel our work and ensure these forgotten stories never fade back into the darkness. While dipping remains the standard for the common laborer's light, the production of higher-grade tallow candles employs the use of molds, a technique that introduces a mechanical uniformity absent in the organic irregularity of the dipped variety. The molds themselves are long, hollow tubes crafted from pewter or tin-plated iron, prized for their smooth interior surfaces which allow the finished candle to release without clinging to the metal walls. These tubes are arranged in wooden frames or tables, often in batteries of a dozen or more, standing vertically like the pipes of a miniature organ. The preparation begins with the threading of the wick, a task that demands dexterity and patience. The worker uses a long wire hook to pull the cotton wick down through the center of the mold, securing it at the bottom tip with a small peg or knot to prevent leakage, and pulling it taut at the top against a crosspiece. This centering is vital, for if the wick touches the side of the mold at any point, the burning candle will melt unevenly and collapse, ruining the product and the reputation of the house. The pouring process is a distinct departure from the dipping room, requiring a different consistency of tallow. The fat must be poured at a slightly lower temperature, thick enough to cool rapidly upon contact with the metal, but fluid enough to fill every crevice without trapping air bubbles that would leave pockmarks on the surface. The caster moves down the rows with a spouted pot, filling the molds until they overflow slightly, creating a reservoir of fat at the top to account for the shrinkage that inevitably occurs as the tallow cools and contracts. This cooling period is a time of anxious waiting. In the height of summer, production can grind to a halt as the ambient heat prevents the candles from setting hard enough to be extracted. To combat this, mold tables are often situated in the draftiest corridors or near windows kept open even in winter, turning the workspace into a freezer to expedite the hardening of the fat. Extraction is the moment of truth in the molding hall. Once the tallow has solidified completely, the peg at the bottom is removed, and the worker pulls firmly but gently on the crosspiece at the top, drawing the candle out of its metal sheath with a satisfying suction sound. A successfully molded candle emerges with a smooth, polished skin and a perfect cylindrical shape, far superior in aesthetic to the rippled texture of a dipped candle. However, the process is fraught with friction. If the mold is dented, or if the tallow was poured too hot, the candle will stick, forcing the worker to melt it out and start over. To prevent this, experienced casters often wipe the insides of the molds with a rag dampened in turpentine or even a trace of refined oil, a trick of the trade that facilitates the release but must be used sparingly to avoid contaminating the surface of the wax. Fresh from the molds or the dipping racks, The candles are functional but lack the refinement required for the market, necessitating a trip to the finisher's bench where they are groomed for sale. For dipped candles, the most pressing issue is the irregular accumulation of fat at the base, often forming a thick bell or a jagged drip that prevents the candle from standing upright in a standard holder. The finisher works at a table equipped with a heated metal plate or a shallow pan of hot water, pressing the base of each candle against the warmth to melt away the excess fat, leveling the bottom until it is flat and stable. This is a messy, repetitive job that generates a constant stream of waste tallow, which is dutifully scraped up and returned to the rendering pot, ensuring that in the economy of the chandlery, nothing is ever truly lost, only recycled. Following the leveling, the candles undergo a process of polishing and trimming to enhance their visual appeal. Workers, often women or older apprentices, use soft woolen cloths to briskly rub the surface of the candles, generating just enough friction heat to smooth out minor imperfections and impart a slight sheen to the dull white fat. The loops of wick that still connect the pairs of dipped candles are severed with shears, and the tips are trimmed to a uniform length, exposing fresh cotton ready for the flame. It is here that the visual grading takes place. Candles with severe deformities, cracks, or discoloration are culled and thrown into the seconds bin or the melting pot, while the pristine specimens are sorted by size and quality. The air in this section of the shop is less oppressive than the rendering room, filled instead with the soft rustling of cloth and the snip of shears, marking the transition from raw manufacturing to commercial presentation. The final step at the bench is the rigorous classification by weight, a system that dictates the nomenclature of the trade. Candles are sold by the pound, but the specific designation, such as long 8s, short 6s, or middling 10s, refers to the number of candles required to make up that pound. A long 8 means 8 slender candles weigh 1 pound, making them an economical choice for the poor, while a short 4 implies thicker, longer-burning lights for the wealthy. The weigher uses a simple balance scale, grouping the finished products into bundles that match these strict criteria. If a batch runs heavy, the chandler loses profit. If it runs light, he risks fines from the local market assays or the guild wardens who police the honesty of trade measures. This mathematical sorting aligns the output of the factory with the budget of the consumer, turning the chaos of rendered fat into standardized units of purchasable time. The storage of tallow candles presents a logistical nightmare that distinguishes the trade from almost any other proto-industrial activity. The product is edible. To the rats, mice, and insects that infest the dark corners of the 18th century city, a chandler's warehouse is a vast, unguarded pantry. The battle against vermin is constant and brutal. Warehouse cats are not pets, but essential employees, prowling the rafters and the spaces between the stacked crates to keep the population of gnawing pests at bay. Candles are typically stored in sturdy wooden boxes or hung in bunches from the ceiling beams, suspended by wire rather than rope to prevent rats from climbing down to feast. A single overlooked infestation can destroy a month's worth of labor in a few nights, leaving behind only gnawed wicks and a scattering of greasy crumbs. A financial disaster that forces chandlers to invest heavily in lined bins and constant vigilance. Beyond the threat of teeth, the chandler must contend with the tyranny of temperature. Tallow has a relatively low melting point, and in the heat of summer, a poorly ventilated warehouse can turn into a disaster zone where candles soften, bend, and fuse together into a singular, unsellable lump. This seasonality dictates the rhythm of production. The frantic peak of manufacturing occurs in the cooler months of autumn and winter, aligning perfectly with the increased demand for light during the long nights. During the summer, production slows and stock is moved to deep cellars or stone-lined rooms to preserve its integrity. This cyclical nature means the workforce often fluctuates, with journeymen hired on for the lighting season and let go when the days lengthen, creating a migratory class of specialized laborers who drift between industries as the sun dictates. The preservation of the candle also involves defending it against rancidity, the chemical decomposition of the fat that leads to a foul, sour odor even before the wick is lit. Over time, tallow oxidizes and turns yellow, losing its value and its burning efficiency. To mitigate this, chandlers aim for a high turnover rate, avoiding long-term stockpiling whenever possible. However, when storage is necessary, the candles are often kept in the dark and covered with layers of straw or bran to absorb moisture and stabilize the temperature. The smell of a chandler's shop is thus a complex bouquet. The sharp, metallic tang of hot grease from the back, mingling with the musty, dry scent of packing straw and the underlying, faint decay of animal fat that no amount of refining can entirely eliminate. It is an olfactory warning that this product, though essential for civilization, remains organic, perishable, and deeply rooted in the biological cycle of life and death. The transition from the workshop floor to the customer's basket begins with the ritual of packaging, a task often relegated to the youngest apprentices whose nimble fingers are best suited for the delicate work. The standard unit of trade is the bundle, typically wrapped in a coarse, distinctive blue paper that serves as a trademark of the chandler's trade, chosen because its dark dye hides the inevitable grease stains better than white parchment ever could. The packer takes the sorted candles, aligning them head to toe to create a compact, rectangular brick, and wraps them tightly, securing the package with hemp twine tied in a specific knot that allows the bundle to be hung from a hook or carried easily by a customer. This wrapping is not merely aesthetic. It provides a crucial layer of insulation against the warmth of the hand and the friction of transport, protecting the soft tallow from bruising or deforming before it even reaches the candlestick. Once bundled, the candles face the perilous journey of distribution, which in the 18th century is a logistical puzzle of weight and fragility. For local trade, the chandler employs street hawkers, often women with large flat baskets balanced on their heads or slung over their arms, who roam the cobblestone streets crying out their wares to the darkened houses of the working class. These vendors must possess an innate sense of meteorology, knowing exactly how long they can expose their stock to the midday sun before the merchandise begins to weep and bend, destroying its value. For distant markets, the bundles are packed into wooden crates lined with straw or sawdust, loaded onto wagons that jolt over rutted roads. The master chandler holds his breath until the delivery is confirmed, knowing that a single hot day or a careless driver can turn a crate of profits into a solid block of unusable grease, requiring the costly and humiliating process of being carted back to the melting pot. The sale of the candle is also a transaction of trust regarding quantity and composition, heavily regulated by municipal authorities who view light as a public necessity akin to bread. The chandler's dozen is a term often whispered in the markets, referring to the practice of adding a 13th candle to the bundle to compensate for the slight underweight of the others or to secure the loyalty of a regular patron. In the shop itself, the exchange is intimate. The customer smells the wares before buying, checking for the rancid tang of bad fat or the telltale softness of poor rendering. It is a sensory negotiation where the quality of the light is judged by the nose and the thumb long before the match is struck, reinforcing the intimate connection between the maker's craft and the buyer's nightly comfort. To understand the product is to understand the labor required to consume it, for the tallow candle of this era is not a set-and-forget technology, but a demanding companion that requires constant maintenance. The cotton wicks, unlike modern braided versions, do not curl over to consume themselves in the hottest part of the flame. Instead, they stand straight and carbonize, forming a charred, mushroom-like tip that dims the light and causes the flame to smoke violently. Every 10 to 15 minutes, the user must perform the ritual of snuffing, using a pair of scissor-like tools with a small box attached to crop the charred wick without extinguishing the flame. In a grand hall lit by hundreds of candles, servants circulate endlessly in a choreographed dance of maintenance, their sole purpose to keep the gloom at bay, while in a humble cottage. The task interrupts the rhythm of reading or sewing, a persistent reminder of the technology's limitations. The sensory experience of burning tallow is distinct and pervasive, defining the olfactory landscape of the 18th century interior. As the animal fat melts and burns, it releases an odor ranging from the faint, savory scent of cooking mutton to the acrid, choking smell of scorched grease, depending on the quality of the rendering. In a crowded room or a theater, the combined heat and smell of hundreds of burning tallow lights can become suffocating, coating the throat and stinging the eyes, a physical price paid for the privilege of sight. This distinguishes the poor from the rich as sharply as their clothing. The wealthy burn beeswax, which smells sweet like honey and burns clean, while the common folk live in the hazy, greasy atmosphere of the tallow dip. The walls and ceilings of homes are slowly stained with a layer of soot, a gradual darkening that mirrors the very night the candles are meant to dispel. Despite these drawbacks, the tallow candle represents a conquest of time, allowing productivity to bleed into the hours previously claimed by sleep. It extends the working day for the weaver, the scholar, and the cook, fundamentally altering the economic output of the household. The cost of this light is significant. A poor family might burn through a week's worth of wages in a month of winter evenings, making the decision to light a candle a serious economic calculation. The stub of a candle is never discarded, but saved to be melted down for a grease lamp or used to wax a thread, embodying a culture of scarcity where every photon is purchased with hard labor. The flickering, yellow light of the tallow flame is the heartbeat of the pre-industrial night, a fragile, smelly, yet miraculous barrier against the terrifying total darkness of the past. As the 18th century winds down, the chandler stands at the precipice of a chemical revolution that will eventually render his ancient craft obsolete. The experiments with spermaceti from Wales and the eventual discovery of stearin and paraffin will transform the industry, moving it from the slaughterhouse to the laboratory, stripping away the smell and the rot. But in this moment, the tallow chandler is still a king of commerce, a vital cog in the machine of society whose dirty, dangerous work allows civilization to function after sunset. His hands, permanently stained and scarred by hot fat, are the tools that craft the instrument of literacy, of courtship, and of late-night governance. The manufactory, with its copper vats and forest of hanging wicks, is a temple to human ingenuity's refusal to accept the limitations of nature. The legacy of this process is not found in the museums, for the product was designed to be destroyed, but in the cultural memory of the language itself, in phrases like burning the midnight oil or not worth the candle. The discipline of the dipping room, the patience of the molding floor, and the logistical triumph of the supply chain set the stage for the factory systems that will soon dominate the world. The chandler's shop is a proto-industrial microcosm, teaching the lessons of standardization, quality control, and mass production long before the steam engine accelerates the pace of life. It is a bridge between the medieval craftsman working alone and the industrial army of the coming century. In the final scene of our narrative, the master chandler extinguishes the lamps in his own workshop, plunging the room into the darkness he has spent his life fighting. The cooling vats creak as the metal contracts, and the heavy smell of suet hangs suspended in the still air, a ghost of the day's labor. He leaves the factory knowing that tomorrow, the cycle of slaughter, rendering, and dipping will begin again, driven by the insatiable human hunger for light. The humble tallow candle, born of blood and fat, remains a testament to the grittiest, most visceral ingenuity of the age, a small, flickering victory over the night that required an ocean of grease to sustain. History is a flame that requires constant tending to prevent it from fading into the dark. Help us keep these lost traditions burning bright by hitting the subscribe button and sharing this story with someone who values the craftsmanship of the past. Tell us in the comments what other ancient trade deserves to be brought into the light.